As a woman, I think though the areas that I found the most difficult were when it was made plain that I was not welcome. That happened when I went to college when I was the only female in the class. And not only was I the only female in certain classes, but I was the only Black person in a class.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision. Welcome back to our continuing series, Race in Tech, where we amplify the voice of our diverse colleagues and we listen and we learn. Our conversations to date have centered on the world of technology. Today, we're going to expand our scope to STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. Our guest is Dr. Natoshia Anderson. Dr. Anderson holds a BS in mechanical engineering, a master's in business, and a doctorate in education. She's the vice president of training and implementation for WOZ ED, the leader in demand-driven K through 12 education. Welcome to the show, Dr. Anderson.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm really happy and excited to be here today.
We're very excited to have you on as a guest and looking forward to our conversation. I know I shared your degree work with our audience, but would you mind sharing a bit more about your background?
Sure. So, where do I start? So, way back long ago, no,
Yeah.
I I'll just say that STEM has been a huge part of my life for such a long period of time. So, as Jeff pointed out, I'm a former or reformed, according to who I'm talking to,
Yes.
um, mechanical engineer. So technology has always been a huge part of what I do. And so I've designed everything from like train car parts, to systems that go inside buildings, like your hot and cold water systems, your air conditioning systems, fire protection systems for all sorts of buildings. Everything as simple as your CVS drugstore to complicated systems like your Mayo Clinic or your CDC offices, because they have specialized requirements.
Right.
And of course, we use technology to do all of those things. Then I moved into education, where instead of actually doing the engineering and using technology in that way, I was actually teaching students how to do those things. I taught CAD classes. I taught 3D animation, 3D modeling, engineering technology classes, and then by the time I ended my education, and I have that in quotes in my head, um, I was the dean over all of those programs and helping to run them and make sure that my faculty and staff had all that they needed so that they could be the best they could be for students. And I've since gone on to start my own business where I spend a lot of time helping organizations find funding, but also develop programming for minority kids. So, kids that look like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's been my life. I've tried to incorporate it in every area of my life. And now with WAS, a large part of what they do is provide these science and STEM kits for students in any area, every area of the educational spectrum. So it doesn't matter if you're in private school or if you're in an inner city school with little to no funding. So we try to find ways to engage students in STEM and and technology so that they can have a good running start at having a really productive career when they grow up.
I'm glad I had you share a bit more about your background because we have some shared background that we could really geek out on at another time. I used to be CIO for a real estate development firm, so we could spend hours talking about building information modeling and
Oh,
it just it would be fascinating sometime. But
I wish you could see my face now. I had a real like gig out moment for it's
yeah,
like we
well, I
have got
almost
to
just
have
called it
that.
BIM, because everybody has to use the acronym. But um, what I'd love to do is start with something that the audience may be assuming by now, because you are at the intersection of being female, being a
Mm.
black female, being a black female working in STEM. What has that been like for you?
Well, if that is not the $1 million question. um, it's been a mixed bag. If I'm honest, I can honestly say that I enjoyed my career when I was a practicing engineer and as a engineering educator. Enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I still the need to discover, to design, to create something new doesn't go away. And I think that that is not dependent on your sex. But as a woman, I think though the areas that I found the most difficult were when it was made plain that I was not welcome.
Uh,
And that happened when I went to college, when I was the only female in the class. And not only was I the only female in certain classes, but I
mhm,
was the only black person in a class. So now it's like now I have two things that are
yeah,
either working for me or working against me. And I could never tell which one won in the
yeah,
instance
yeah,
is are
yeah,
like, okay, so are you against me because I'm a woman, or are you against me because I'm a black person, or is it both or some combination?
yeah,
And so it made navigating those spaces really hard, unnecessarily so to me, because I felt like there was, affirmative action did several good things, but it changed the perception of people's ability. So there were people who thought, okay, she's only here because we need to fill this quota of black people,
yeah,
and then she hits two because she's black and she's a woman, and it diminished in their eyes my ability. So I wasn't there because I was just as smart, or I
right,
deserve, I
yeah,
deserved that seat. I earned that seat in the class. It was because I'm black and I'm a woman. And so I felt like, and this is again Natasha Anderson, I always felt like I had to work harder to show them that I belonged there.
hmm
And again, I took that on myself, but it's totally unfair that that's the perception. And actually that still exists for women these days, because it's just, I don't know why. I don't know why that's still a thing, but it's really still a thing. And it
but
didn't get better when I went into corporate America. So it was even worse, because the way engineering is set up, it's still, the environment is made for white men, older
yeah,
white men. That's the truth. And here's this, young black woman coming in, and I think I know everything. I didn't, but that was the perception. And then of course you're only here because we have to fill a quota. So
yeah, yeah. And on one of the recent webinars that we hosted, one of our panelists, Angel Henry, a black woman in tech, talked about being the only. And you mentioned that. And
hmm
so, in some cases, you've not only been the only, but you've also been the first in some cases, right?
yes,
So, what
yes.
added pressure or angst did that cause?
um well, first I'll say this. I think we should really examine systems where we're still having first and onlys in 2020. We're
Yeah,
still having first and only. So let's, I'll put that out there. I can tell you, having been first and onlys, that it's hard. It's unnecessarily hard. It can change your perception of other people. The pressure of it is so, it's not sustainable.
yeah,
I've seen a lot of people crack under the pressure of it. That pressure is, I can't even describe it in a way that I don't know if it would make sense to people. to be, because it's like you're always on a stage. You don't
Yeah.
have a moment. You can't make a mistake. And if you make a mistake, it's like this cataclysmic event because you're the first and only in the class, in the, in the school, in the whatever it is, you're the first and only. So you have these ideals that you have to live up to, but they're not your own.
Yeah. I heard someone at one event challenge the audience, and they challenged them this way. It was an audience of predominantly white males because it was a tech audience. And when they were talking about being the only and being the first and only, the challenge was go put yourself in situations where you are the only
Right.
and see, experience that, feel that. I challenge our audience today with that same thing. Go to events where you might be the only. Just soak in how that feels, and it gives you just a small glimpse into it.
And don't just do it once. That's the thing, because what you want to do is sort of keep doing that, um, and see what happens. Because it's not just the first time you walk into a classroom and and you walk around and you realize, okay, so I'm the only woman in here. I am the only Black person in here. It's every time.
Yeah,
It's every
it
time.
builds. It builds, right? The stress and the pressure continues to build and wear you down.
Yes. Yes. There is. It's the unspoken. I would almost rather, you say, "Hey, I don't like you, don't care for you, don't think you're good enough to be here," to my face, but for you to be silent when, things are happening or other people are saying things, there's there's that pressure.
Yeah,
There's the idea that you wouldn't, because I'm different from you, or I look different from you, that you would treat me differently than you would anybody else. There's that. And or you would treat me worse than you would treat,
and
not even differently, it's worse. So um there's really no way to get over that. You just have to get through it, and that means that there are probably going to be some scars that come from that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what microaggressions have you experienced being the first and only? And I know the list is probably quite long, but but what are some of them that maybe you still experience today?
This is a really good question. So I have had this conversation recently with my husband, because we were talking about microaggressions and how even even people who look like us,
Hmm.
because my husband is one, but we have a cadre of friends, who are all Black, or well, we call our friends like the International Coalition. But I bring this up, I bring this up, because there was a situation that occurred where I was like, I can't, it's like one of those things where I can't believe you said that. Like, think about the words that you're saying and what and how it could be perceived from someone else, especially all of the women sitting at this table. But yeah, when I worked, when I was an engineer, those happened all the time. I think I told you, in an earlier conversation about being in a meeting with a whole bunch of white men, and we were waiting for our client to come in so we could have the design meeting.
Hmm.
And he came in, he threw the pad down in front of me and sat down, because in his mind, the only reason that I could be in the room was that I was the administrative assistant or I was the secretary. I could not be the engineer. It just never crossed his mind that that was my role.
Yeah,
And when I told him that, I'm like, I don't know who your secretary is, but she is not me, because I am the mechanical engineer of record for your project.
yeah,
So he turned all shades of red.
uh
And
huh,
it's like one of those things where it's offensive, sure. It's tiring, and then it's almost like in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you don't know better. Like, you don't
yeah,
know better. Because I don't think he was doing it intentionally, but it's just this was acceptable behavior because no one was there to call them out about it, or at least do the corrections that needed to happen.
Yeah.
So the other one that, I mean, I've had men who have taken credit for my work in front of me.
Oh,
um, we did the whole, you've heard this one before where you're in a meeting, the boss is there, you say something, nobody pays attention, the guy next to you says exactly the same thing and he gets the credit. And
yeah.
it's like, but the same, I just said the exact same thing. So that happened frequently. And I honestly learned to use it to my advantage, because then I would just tell the person next to me, because I'm like, okay, well, he's not going to listen to me. um I like my words are like the Charlie Brown teacher, we he can't understand, but if you say it, he's gonna get it, and then we'll be able to do that. And so then I would just tell him.
Yeah. Well, that's one workaround, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
because what I realized then is that it takes more than one to change the culture, and there has to be a desire and a need to change in order for it to really happen. And we also have to recognize that it's going to take time. I think I read somewhere where it takes about 2 to 3 years for culture to actually change. So it's going to take time.
Yeah. And it's micro steps, it seems like. In addition to taking time, it just seems like progress is just tiny, tiny baby steps towards it.
Yeah, but we have to be willing to make those steps,
Mm.
and recognize first. It's like sort of recognizing what is the problem, like what is the problem, and then once you recognize what is the problem, then here are some potential steps to solving the problem, and everyone has to buy into those solutions in order for it to work. So and then you have to put in the work, and that's the difficult part, because it may mean we have to change, not only the way we behave at work, but it's we have to watch our language. We need
Right.
to, maybe we need to structure the way we do our meetings. And so it requires everyone to be on board for it to really work.
Yeah.
And especially if we're talking about not just for women, to to be more inclusive of women in the office, but minority women and people who are othered.
Hmm.
We have to do that work, because we're not in a place where we can just sort of throw people away, when especially when we're all talented in our own way, and it may be that someone who looks like me, or who is from Bangladesh,
Hmm.
has a skill that we need. So why wouldn't we be willing to make adjustments so that he or she or me would be comfortable enough to want to be here every day?
The problems that we are facing as people in STEM, or just people in general, are so complex. Why you wouldn't want to have diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background to help solve those problems is beyond me. I think that's what it's going to take to tackle a lot of society's problems today is diversity.
I agree with that. I so let's just be clear. What's happening today has, or I should say, and by today I don't mean like actually today. I mean in our current climate, in the United States and across the world, is a reckoning, if we are true and honest about what we are seeing.
Hmm.
And the pushback and the resistance that we are seeing is because, we've been comfortable.
Yeah.
And so when you get pushed, and we see this acted out in other ways, but right now when you get pushed past your comfort zone, and you've been asked to examine a place that you don't want to go,
Yeah.
um, then it almost puts you on the defensive, which is of course where no one wants to be. But then you don't necessarily get the opportunity to really just sort of sit back, examine not only yourself, but like the behaviors of other people in your circle, to do the really good work, to get in the good trouble that
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
was talking about.
Uh-huh.
um you can't allow yourself to go there, which puts us in the place that we currently are. So all of the violence that we're seeing, or I can't say all of the violence, like that's just not true, but I feel like the pushback for the Black Lives Matter movement has been, it's more about, when people say all lives matter, yes, that's true.
Yes.
And we're taking nothing from it. What we're saying is that Black lives matter too, or
Yes.
also, in
Yes.
addition to everybody's life. And so it's not we're not demonizing anyone else. It's not like white people are bad. It's not that. It's
Yeah.
we want you guys to see us as people with the same rights, responsibilities, options,
Yes.
skills, talents, beauty as anyone else. And so when something bad happens to us, care
Yeah.
care about it and look at it and say, this keeps happening. This keeps happening. I mean, and to one race of people, these things keep happening.
Happening.
So when we're saying that, when we give you examples, and then we have people say, oh no, but
Right.
he was a criminal. He's not a good individual. She should have complied with police. But then we have examples where, other people didn't comply, but they're still alive.
Yeah.
They may be in jail, but
Yeah.
they didn't comply. They're not dead. They didn't get shot in the back. They didn't get shot for having a toy gun. They didn't, they were running
Yeah.
away from police. They didn't get shot in the back. You know what I mean? So those things aren't happening to other people, or at least, and not at the scale that
Scale.
they're
Yeah.
happening to us. So um I know that was a long answer to a
No, no,
really
that was
simple
but
question.
when we first spoke, we made the comment that it seemed like the issue of race had somewhat gone out of the media attention. Yeah, there's still the protests in Portland and in other places, but the media attention was now focused somewhere else. And then it all got brought back to the surface with the shooting of Jacob Blake.
Yeah.
And I think you described that week as feeling heavier.
Oof.
What did you mean by that?
That last week, it I I'm trying to find words. It felt like this is probably going to be a weak example, because there aren't really. It just felt like going to three funerals in a week. Like day
Uh,
after day after
yeah,
day after day after day. It's death. It's death. It's death. It's death. And there's no escape from it. And there's no way you, because as I wake up every morning, I look in the mirror and I see a Black woman, and what it feels like, fair or unfair, what it feels like is that no one's listening. Like the message is not getting out, um, to the people who need to hear it. Like,
yeah,
we aren't here. We don't want to take your stuff. We don't want to be you. We want to be able to live like regular people. We
hmm,
don't want to be killed. We don't want to be afraid of police. We understand the need for police, most of us, cuz I'm not for defunding the police. But I feel like, though, I don't want to be afraid when I get pulled over. I don't want to fear when my 16-year-old son or my 18-year-old daughter leave my house, if I'm going to see them again
yeah,
because somebody flipped out, because she may have said the wrong thing and this person decided this Black girl doesn't need to live.
yeah,
I don't want to I don't want to raise my kids to be afraid. I don't want them to have a life where they're always looking over their shoulder, where they have to speak the right way. You have to speak white.
yeah,
You have to be better, stronger, faster. You have to be smarter than everybody else. And then you still may not be able to get to a good place, because there's still racism built into laws
Yeah.
and to the way businesses have in their hiring practices. So last week was so heavy because it was like all of those thoughts. And
Right.
then there's the protests. And then we have people popping off on TV and on Twitter and saying things that are just like, I just I just want to be understood.
Yeah.
What we're saying to you guys isn't that we hate all of y'all and go away. It's like, can we really be family? Can we all be Americans with the same opportunities? Can we just be equal in every way
Right.
that matters?
Yeah.
That was what all of that is. This week is better, but it's still heavy.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up another intersection, right? You're female, you're black, you're in STEM, you're also a mother. Uh,
Yeah.
can you share with our listeners a little bit how this year has impacted you as a parent? And I know it goes well beyond just this year, but with everything that has happened this year, how has that impacted you as a parent?
So this is funny. So I was walking with some girlfriends. We're all mothers. We walk every morning. But yesterday we were talking, and I said, and then I'll bring it home. So I remember exactly where I was when George Zimmerman verdict came in,
Hmm.
Trayvon Martin, and, he was not guilty. And I remember, because I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference, I remember in my room crying so hard. Don't know him, didn't know Trayvon either.
Yeah.
But I just remember crying so hard because my thought is, what do I tell my kids?
Yeah.
What do I tell my son? How do I prepare him for a world that may kill him because he has a hoodie on?
Right.
What? How do you explain that? Or my daughter, how do I explain that? And I couldn't see it. And then there's been several, but then George Floyd, and he was calling out to his mother, and that was the saddest thing.
Oh, yeah.
It just
Yeah.
broke me in a way that I cannot explain. And what I remember about that is that my son, um, I've never seen him. He's not an angry kid. He's just sort of, he's real laid back.
Hmm.
He was mad. And I didn't know what to do with that either,
Yeah.
because I don't want you to leave being upset, because then that can lead to an additional situation. And I want you to come home to me. I want you to be safe where I can hug and love on you.
Yeah.
So this has been, I've been watching carefully, and we've been having lots of conversations with our kids so that we can make sure that they are informed, but b, that they are making good decisions for themselves, because unfortunately this is not this is not the end of this.
Right. Right.
And since we don't know when the end is, we have to keep them vigilant and prepared.
Because a mistake could be fatal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. And I don't want to be, I mean, I love them, sympathize with them, and feel for them, but I don't want to be them. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm honest, I don't
Yeah.
want to be those mothers and fathers. I don't want to be Jacob Blake Sr. I don't want to be doing an interview on CNN talking about
No.
my son being, no, 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 I don't
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so back in the 60s, I'm going to shift to my parent for a second and switch topics just a little bit. Back in the 60s, I think my mom would have considered herself as a part of the feminist movement. Now, she wasn't involved in the marches and all that, but it was a pretty big deal for a Baptist minister's wife, let me tell you. uh,
Yes.
you speak in terms of a womanist movement rather than a feminist movement. What
Mm-hmm.
is that, and how has that come about?
So this is interesting, and thank you for bringing this up. So feminism is a big thing, and
Hmm.
there are people who are for it and against it. Because they assume that feminism means that you are against men, And it's not that, it's that you are for women.
Hmm.
You want women to have the same equal rights as men do and did. Um, and the same thing, so feminism is, I'll just summarize it by saying it's the Black version of feminism. So when we were talking about the last week was the anniversary of the
Yes.
women's suffrage movement,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
it's and everybody says it was the birth of feminism. Well, what they leave out of that equation is that Black women were an important part of that movement, but we didn't have the right to vote. We didn't get the right to vote until the Civil Rights Act was enacted, right? We still weren't equal, even though we marched in the streets, held signs, we helped support, but we didn't get the benefit of it.
Right.
And so the womanist movement said that Black women, deserve our rights too. And
Hmm.
that's what the womanist movement is for. And you when you think about taking that stance, it's not that you are anti-white women or other women, it's that you are for Black women.
Right. I find it, what I found interesting is, I consider myself a history nerd. I love history. And while I knew cognitively that when women's suffrage came about and women got the right to vote, I knew cognitively that it did not include Black women, but it never struck home to me until this year with everything that's going on. And I hate to admit that, but it's the same thing that you and I talked about last week, that um, the reason why we're doing these episodes is because it's a reaction to our own inaction, to my own inaction. So I want to thank you first of all for being so candid and so willing to talk to us today, because I think these messages are so important. And what I'd love to do in closing here is our audience really has a propensity towards action. We really like to have a solid call to action at the end of these episodes of Status Go. So, what actions can our listeners take today because they listened to our conversation?
This I'm glad, so glad. First off, thank you for allowing me to be candid, and for asking me to be on the show. So here are some good steps that I think your audience can take. One, be willing to have those brave, hard, uncomfortable conversations. Yes, have them. But then when those conversations are over, don't check it off the list and keep going, doing the same things you were doing and believing the same things that you were believing. Do your own research. There are plenty of books out there that you can read on anti-racism, because it's one thing to say I am not a racist, and the majority of white people are not. i
Yeah.
would i would like to believe, but it's about how to be anti-racist and what that looks like in your workplace, in your home, in the conversations with your one Black friend. It's
Yeah.
just sort of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how to have those conversations, but move the needle with your friend group, so that when you are confronted or the situation happens, you can take a look at it and you can say, oh, okay, this is what he was talking about or she was talking about.
Yeah.
Now I can put all of this education I've been getting into action when I step up and I say, hey man, that's wrong. Like I heard what you're saying and that's racist, or that's this, you have discriminatory practices, and
Hmm.
and I don't think that's the way you want to go. And the other thing is, this movement, this moment that we're in, we cannot do it without support. And so there's this, the term of white ally has been around forever. And I get it, but I really, it's more than your allyship. We need you all to have a call to action.
Yeah.
When you see people being mistreated, say something.
Yeah.
Just, like videotape, that's the end thing. Actually, my brother was telling me that he had gotten pulled over the other day, and he looked he looked over, and there was a white lady in her car recording
Mm-hmm.
the encounter with the cop. And she mouthed to him, "Are you okay?" And he was like, "That has never happened. And my brother is 52 years old."
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
That's never happened." So we need you guys on board like that. Like, you're willing to step out of your lane,
Yeah.
go out of your, get out of that comfort zone and help, really help, find ways in Black communities that you can be of assistance, because there are things that, we don't know, and we don't have all the answers. What we know is that things can no longer stay the same, but we can't do this by ourselves.
That is such a great call to action. And I will mention to our listeners, we at Status Go and at Intervision have been gathering a list of resources that you can access and read. It provides links to various resources. So I am sure we will include a link to that in our show notes for those that want to take the action to learn more.
Well,
Uh, and
there's two things to add to your list. So one
yeah.
is called The Memo, and it's called by Minda Hertz. Minda
Uh-huh.
Hertz. And that one talks about being a Black woman in leadership in, in the white world. And so she calls it The Memo. The other
Okay.
one is called Hood Feminism: Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot. And this one is by Mickey Kendall, Mickey with
Okay.
two Ks. Um,
Okay.
and so you can add those to the list. So those are dealing with more women issues as it relates to being a minority in business.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I don't think we had those on the list, so those will be great additions. And before we close, can you just give us a word about your podcast? Because I know you're a host of a podcast, and I think our listeners might want to listen in on your show as well. So could you just give us a little bit of a background on your podcast?
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So, my podcast is called Stemming in Stilettos. We highlight the stories of minority women in STEM, and we give them a safe place to tell their STEM story and to give advice to those young girls and young professionals who are coming up the ranks behind them. That's the premise. That's what we do. It's 30 minutes of your time. And these women are phenomenal. They're awesome and amazing. And I hope that you listen in and listen up, because that's what we tell our listeners to do.
I love that name. You had mentioned that the other day, and I just think that's fantastic. And we will add that to our list of resources as well. So, Dr. Anderson, thank you so much. The giving of your time, responding to my blind email, just reaching out and saying, "Hey, would you be on a podcast?" That was fantastic. But thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate your candor today, and really appreciate getting to know you. To our listeners, if you have a question or want to learn more, go to intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information. We'll provide a link to that resource that I mentioned as well. This is Jeff Tunn for Dr. Natoshia Anderson. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.